All right, go ahead and get started now. I want to say hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Wellness Wednesday, coming on to a healthy brain, the benefits of yoga for brain health. My name is Alexis, and I am a program assistant at the BC Brain Wellness Program. I also have the pleasure of serving as your MC for today's event. At today's event, we will be sharing a short yoga session, as well as a talk outlining the current research of the benefits of yoga and mindful movements on the body and brain. We are joined today by two guest speakers, Vanessa Barron and Amanda Camilleri. Vanessa will lead us in a seated yoga session while also sharing how both yoga and meditation have impacted her life. Amanda will then speak on the research supporting yoga as an effective technique for bolstering brain health. Before we get started, I'd like to first acknowledge that the BC Brain Wellness Program of the David Mafagian Center for Brain Health is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam peoples. I'm joining you today from Vancouver, the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. As all of you are joining from different places today, I encourage us all to take a moment to reflect and give thanks to the lands where we are privileged to work, learn, and play on. A couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat for our presenters today, and we will make sure to answer them towards the end of the session. As well, to keep everything streamlined, only our presenters and MC will be unmuted for today's session. Please note as well that this session will be recorded, and the video will be available on our website in around 2 weeks' time on bcbrainwellness.ca if you'd like to rewatch it or share with friends and family. Right. Without further ado, I will introduce our first guest speaker, Vanessa. Vanessa has a Bachelor's of Science in Physical Therapy from the University of Toronto and a Master's in Business Administration from the University of Melbourne, Australia. And she currently teaches business courses at Langara College and BCIT. Yoga and meditation became an integral part of Vanessa's recovery following an accident. And after receiving her teacher's certification in 2020, she now brings her personal experience and compassion to teaching. She applies these practices as one of our lovely yoga instructors at the BC Brain Wellness Program. Vanessa is passionate about body alignment and strengthening the mind-body-heart connection. Right, the floor is all yours, Vanessa. Welcome, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you, everyone. I know there's some familiar faces and some new ones. And I'm excited to share a little bit about the practice of yoga and my own personal journey. So our topic today, coming home to a healthy brain, the benefits of yoga for brain health. So does anyone know what this symbol is? If you do, you can just type it in the chat. And those who are monitoring the chat can let me know if anyone knows what this symbol is. It's related to our topic title, and it is actually the Sanskrit for the sound of Om. Yoga is an ancient practice that evolved over time from over 25,000 years ago, beginning with the Vedas and Hinduism. And then other texts have been written over the last 2,500 years, such as the Yoga Sutras and Yoga Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Our European and more North American interest grew in yoga over the 19th century. And in the mid 20th century is really when the popularity of yoga and the practice, the physical part of asana began, particularly when a famous yogi called B.K.S. Iyengar published his book Light on Yoga in 1966. And from that blossomed a whole lot of different styles of yoga. There is hot yoga, there's power yoga, there's flow yoga, there's vinyasa, there's kundalini, there's many, many different styles out there. But all of the styles have in common this focus on bringing mind-body balance, awareness, and harmony. So it's a physical practice as well as philosophy, but whatever draws you to yoga, it is right for you. So the sounds of Om actually have 3 phases to this sound. It is sound and sort of a word that represents omniscience or divinity, and it unifies our senses and unites our collective practice. So that's why you often will experience Oms being chanted either at the beginning of a practice or at the end of a practice. And it's a really low sound, and as I mentioned, it connects you more fully into the sensations in your body. The ah sound at the beginning starts from really low down, thinking of it being deep. And then that sound sort of moves upward with the ah ending in the And the end of this sound of the M sound is where you can really start to hear that in your inner ear. You can often really feel it as well in through your ribs and chest cage. And that again is bringing us into our practice, into awareness of our physical bodies and joining us collectively. So with that, I'll invite you to join me in a short chair practice right now. So if you want to come on to your chairs, I'm just trying to open my screen. Alexis, am I in the main view now?
We still see the slides there.
You still see the slides? Okay. There we go. So we'll begin by sitting on a chair. Come forward in your chair so that your back is not resting on the chair and that your feet are flat on the floor beneath you. And you can start with your palms up. And first, just feel into your feet. So lift your toes and feel the balls of your feet connecting with the floor. And then gently lower the toes and notice the sensation of the bottoms of your toes connecting with the mat. Notice your heels and notice your sitting or your hip bones at the edge of the chair. Sometimes it helps if you just sweep the muscles away and really feel that connection in the surface beneath you. And we'll start with inhaling and lifting the shoulders up towards your ears. And as you exhale, squeeze them together and down. Inhaling, lift the shoulders up, squeeze them together and down. And one third and final time with nice big shoulder circles and release. Keeping the upper arm supported on your lap, just turn to look over your left shoulder. Aiming to bring your chin over top of that shoulder and keep it parallel to the floor. Now turn your head forward. And now to the opposite shoulder, looking over your right shoulder. And noticing any differences side to side. Notice how this feels in your neck. And come forward. Then bring your left ear towards your left shoulder. But watch that those shoulders haven't crept up. Keep them down. And this one should feel pretty good, especially if you've been working at the computer or gardening. Opening the side of the neck. Come back to center. And then in the other direction. Keeping the shoulders down and focusing on ear to shoulder. And then back to center. Now we're going to lift our arms overhead, interlace your fingers, turn your palms up towards the ceiling and straighten your elbows. So if you're down here, because that's where your shoulders go instead of up here, that's okay. Let the chin come forward so your head and neck are relaxed. Now feel into those sitting bones in the feet, root down through the lower body and lift up and grow taller. Feeling the length in your spine, the ribs widening, the opening of the shoulders, the extension of your elbows, the opening of the palms. And to think about your breath here, keep it smooth and relaxed. And when you begin to exhale next, release the hands, slowly lowering them down to the side. Fingertips point up to just open the wrists. And then relax your hands at your side. Keep your sitting bones nice and rooted. Lift your belly up and then turn to look over your right shoulder. You can bring one arm across, one arm just behind your hip. And again, tune into the sensation in your spine, in your shoulders, your neck, your belly. Come forward. And now turning into the opposite direction. And acknowledging and noticing the differences we may have side to side. Become aware of that as you inhale back to center. Now, option of where you put your hand here, you can hold the bottom of your chair, or you can bring your left hand just under your thigh, and then reach the right arm overhead. So we come sideways into a side bend. Feel that opening right from the bottom of your hip, root that right hip down, lift through the right side of your ribs, right shoulder, fingertips, and then slowly come back to center. And again, you are going to do what feels right for you. So if your arm doesn't lift quite as high as mine, that's okay. Bringing the right hand under your hip or chair. Now reach the left arm overhead. Press that left sitting bone down, the left side of your hip, and lift up through the ribs, through the fingertips. Watching the pace of your breath. And then slowly coming back to center. And now bend your elbow, patting the back of your shoulder. And again, everyone will be at a different spot, but now reach that elbow up towards the ceiling, keeping that upper arm close to your cheek. You can use the other arm to help it a little bit, but no force in yoga. The thing about yoga is there should not be pain. You may feel opening in the poses, but not pain. And then release that arm down. And then bring your hand to the other shoulder. Lift that right shoulder, elbow up, extending the shoulder. And again, you can use the other arm to keep that upper arm by your cheek and to help move it back a little bit if you feel like you can go a tiny bit further. Take an easy breath in. Soft, gentle exhale. And then release that arm. And sitting again at the side of your chair, now extend the right heel out, lifting the toes up towards your head with a nice tall back. Now the focus here is to open the back of the leg. And if this doesn't feel like much of an opening to you, this is where yoga props can be really helpful. Blocks, you have lots of different heights, but even a stool or another chair will work. And you can lift that right leg up, placing the heel on a little bit of height. Keep pulling the toes up towards you and keep the back nice and straight. Take a nice deep breath in. Soft, gentle exhale. And then slowly bend that knee. Place that foot back down on the mat. And straighten the left leg, pulling the toes up so the ankle's active. You should even feel this thigh muscle contracting. And again, options here. So this may open the back of your leg, or you may feel like you want a little more height. So you can bring a block, a stool, another chair, spine nice and long. Tune into the back of the right thigh. Squeeze your thigh bones, squeeze the kneecaps, and then bring your hand under your thigh. Place the foot back down on the mat. And then we're going to turn sideways on the chair so that one thigh is on the chair and the other hip is sort of hanging off the chair. And adjust yourself so that that knee is over the ankle of the foot and the thigh that is on the, for the thigh that's on the chair. Then the leg that's off the chair, extend it behind you so that you're sort of on the balls of your feet and your toe. So there's going to be lots of options here. So some of you may find, wow, that's a pretty big stretch. You may be opening here in the front of your hip. You may choose to just stay here for the stretch, but I'm going to give you some options if you'd like to add on. So some of you may want to raise your arms up overhead, interlace your thumbs and send the fingertips to the ceiling. If it feels okay for your neck, some of you may want to bring your gaze to the bottoms of your thumbs, looking upwards. So we're lifting the shoulders, but rooting down through the feet. Press the back heel towards the floor. And some of you that have done more yoga with me or know that you want to challenge your strength and balance even further, you may choose to press down through the front foot and lift an inch or two off the chair. This pose is called Warrior One or Virabhadrasana 1. Take a nice slow deep breath in. Soft, gentle exhale. One more breath in. And as you exhale, if you were lifted, lower your thigh back down to the chair. Release your arms. Bend the back knee and step forward. And then walk your feet around to the other side. Again, thigh is supported, one thigh's on the chair, one thigh's off. Knee is over ankle. Straighten out the back legs, coming up on the balls of the feet. Extending the back knee. Again, this may be where it's good for you to just work that opening of the hip flexor. Option here to lift arms overhead, interlace the thumbs, send the fingertips towards the ceiling. Second option is to bring your gaze upwards towards the base of your thumbs. And those who wish to do so may want to press into that front foot and lift a few inches off the chair. That engages the leg muscles more deeply. Press into the front foot, the balls of the back foot, extend the leg, lift the belly, reach the fingertips upwards. So there's a rooting down through the legs, but a lifting up through the upper body. One more breath. And as you exhale, slowly lower down to the chair if your thigh was raised. Release your hands. Bend that back leg, step it forward, and then walk your feet around to the front of the chair. And we're going to end that short mini practice with a active moving meditation called mental centering. So I invite you to close your eyes or soften your gaze on the floor ahead of you. Bring your hands up beside your ears, an inch away but not touching. And take a slow, full, deep breath in with the hands in stillness. And as you begin to exhale, slowly move the hands forward around your head until the palms connect in front of your face, with your thumbs at about the level of your eyebrows, but not touching. Keeping your hands in stillness with a nice slow, deep breath in. And as you exhale, slowly lower your hands down the line of your spine until the base of your thumbs connect with the front of your chest. And in our theme today, join me for one soft Om to close the class. Inhaling. Exhaling, tuck your chin, let the head come forward. Take a moment to be thankful for that short practice you gave yourself. Gently lift your head and release your hand. So that is a small example of some yoga. I'm going to move back to our slides and share a little bit about my own path to becoming a yoga teacher. So my very first class, as Alexis mentioned, I'm originally from Ontario. And after doing my master's in Australia, when my husband and I moved back to Ontario, we knew it was time for a career and a geographic move. So my very first yoga class was here in Vancouver. In the East Coast, we sort of think of people on the West Coast as doing lots of yoga. And so the very first class I went to was a highly choreographed class where there was all sorts of Sanskrit. There was very little cueing around transitions. They were using words like Mula Bandha that I'd never heard of. And it was really quite a fast-paced class. And so I felt completely like I quite didn't fit in and didn't know where I was going in all of these very flowing yoga poses. But I did become interested enough in that experience to look for some other yoga types of classes and keep exploring the practice. So I went to different classes, tried different styles over time. And eventually I found a yoga teacher who was at the same workplace that I was and was offering before work classes from 7 to 8 a.m. And that style of yoga just really resonated for me. And I became really curious. And that is sort of when I became more committed to having a regular practice myself. So I worked with that teacher for over 10 years. Her name was Laura. And also during that time, I was working full time. I had young kids. And after I had spent years in the healthcare system as a physiotherapist, I really wanted to impact the healthcare system at a bigger level. So that's when I moved into supporting large system level change and getting to see lots of different areas of the healthcare system. I worked on changing wait times in emergency, building facilities for people with mental health issues, working on reducing infections in acute care. So what I've loved about my career, both as a physio and when I worked at the system level, was being able to learn lots of new things and keep growing. The other thing that I really had my sights on was sort of climbing the corporate ladder into more senior leadership positions. So one of those roles I got on my path and my aspirations was to be a director for a team of consultants that supported change in the health authorities. And one of the things I loved about that was also being able to help them on their career paths and really focus on these values of learning and collaboration. So that's been a very key theme and core value for me in my work. And in addition to work, I was developing my cycling passion. I had always done bike commuting, even on Ontario when the weather was nice, I would ride my bike to work. And I had a friend who loved road cycling. And the first year I went on some longer rides with him using my commuter bike, eventually getting a road bike one Christmas, and just again fell in love with the sport. So you can see in the bottom right, that's me before a big ride that's called the Pacific Populaire, which is a 100K ride through Metro Vancouver. But this passion, unfortunately, led me to an accident, which happened when I was biking home from work on a residential street on a bike path. It was a little bit late in the evening, had all my lights on, but all of a sudden a car was in front of me and I had no time to stop. I remember being catapulted over my bike. I remember the sound of my body hitting the car. And when I opened my eyes, I was on my left side. The driver got out and wanted to help me up, and I knew enough to say, no, I don't think I should get up. Can you call my husband for me? Because I was only 5 blocks from home, and he was a first responder. Between the time of that call and him arriving, I started to feel pain. I started to get nauseous. I had dry heaves. I noticed I was bleeding from my leg. And as soon as he arrived, called the ambulance and I was taken to hospital. Because I was fairly still talkative, coherent, conscious, most of my hospital care was focused on my broken leg. And I stayed in one night and was released the next day. I was at home for about 6 weeks on crutches, being a super keen employee and caring about my work. I was still making calls into work and checking in. And then when I went to work back face to face in January is when I started to recognize that I had concussion symptoms. Concussion sounds very mild, so I've also put /head injury. And again, because I could talk, I'm walking around, it was really hard to see what all of these challenging symptoms were. And so here are a few categories, the standard sort of categories of concussion head injury. Occasionally sleep is defined as its own category. And I experienced all of these symptoms. I had headaches, I was light and sound sensitive, I was really nauseous and dizzy, I had vision problems with working on the computer, I wasn't sleeping at night. I'd never had anxiety before, and all of a sudden I'm experiencing anxiety. I had a lot of memory issues. I realized that I would be leaving the stove on in the kitchen and completely forgetting it. So although these, again, were not really visible, they were extremely debilitating when I was trying to work and had a young family. And a lot of these symptoms are not unique to head injury and concussion. So many of you may also know what some of experiencing these symptoms are like. And the thing about brain injury that is so challenging is, having worked in the healthcare system, I was immediately trying to find healthcare practitioners and look for different health providers that could help me. I was super, super committed. I actually started physio 2 weeks after the accident for my knee, and I was really trying to force myself to get better. The thing with head injury and concussion is that you can't really force it. It is a much slower healing process, and it's really unpredictable. There are days when you may feel better, and I would push myself only to have rebound symptoms the next day or two later. So that was a really challenging point for me. I was working about 3 days a week. I kept trying to do graduated returns and boost up my hours, and I kept failing those. Eventually, I went on to long-term disability and lost my job over that time. So this was an extremely difficult time of my life. I had really resonated with being able to be, fast and dynamic, multitask, do lots of things, juggle lots of balls, family, work life, friendships, social activities. And that became impossible with what I was facing with my symptoms. And I really started to do some really deep looking around what am I going to be able to do with my life now. Through that, yoga really became my solace. I was able to start practicing yoga about 6 months after my accident. And this was a way for me to connect with myself. I would feel better after I practiced. It didn't matter if my thinking wasn't fast. I could just be in my body. And that really is one of the things doing this regular yoga practice. Sometimes that was all I would achieve in a day. But it gave me the courage to keep going forward. And I also cultivated meditation practice during that time. So as I was trying to think what I would do next in my life, knowing that the type of work and doing 50-hour work weeks wasn't going to be feasible for me, I connected with my yoga teacher and started to talk about yoga teacher training. And she was very, very encouraging and suggested a couple of different types of yoga certification programs. I knew I really wanted to have the same practice that I have been taught in. Oops, sorry about that. So I went to training that was actually in Hawaii, lucky me. It was divided into 2 weeks. The most basic level of yoga teacher training is 200 hours. And being away meant that I didn't have to try and juggle family responsibilities while I was trying to learn and get certified. So that is me and some of my fellow teachers after we graduated from our yoga teacher training. And so for me, it has been sort of a journey of continuing to learn and grow. One of the things I love about yoga is that there's so many levels to it, so much richness, history, philosophy, and experience that I could do for the rest of my life and never become a master. So it really fits with my values of learning. And I was so fortunate that although COVID happened right after I got my teacher training, and the idea of teaching in a studio was now not becoming an option, I was able to connect in with Sally from the Brain Wellness Program, and the program had already switched to be completely virtual, and I began teaching here. So that is a little bit about my journey, my path. And to end where we started, we'll come back to the roots of yoga and this word namaste, which is around acknowledging our oneness and collective equality. So with that, thank you and namaste.
Thank you so much for leading us through your yoga session and for sharing your experiences with us, Vanessa. That was beautiful. Next up, we have Amanda Camilleri. Amanda is a current PhD student with the BC Brain Wellness Program and in Dr. Silky Appel-Cresswell's lab. She graduated from McGill University in 2017 with a major in psychology and a minor in molecular biology and behavioral sciences. In 2021, Amanda completed her master's degree in health, kinesiology, and applied physiology at Concordia University, studying the effects of exercise intervention on sleep quality in individuals with obstructive sleep apnea and insomnia. In her spare time, Amanda teaches meditation as an IMMA certified instructor. Right, welcome, Amanda.
Thanks, Alexis. And thank you, Vanessa. That was so lovely to hear your story and to practice with you all. So I'll be talking today about yoga for brain wellness and a little bit of the background science. I'll start by describing what yoga is and building off of what Vanessa already mentioned. Then I'll talk about what yoga consists of, including the 8 limbs of yoga, go into the neuroscience of yoga, and finally, what you can do and how you can implement these changes into your life. So first, when we think of yoga, we often think of downward dog, tree pose, warrior poses, and even eagle pose. And these are all examples of yoga, but they're examples of one component of yoga, asanas or postures. Yoga really consists of much more than just postures. So what is yoga? Yoga comes from a Sanskrit root, yuj, meaning to unite the body, the mind, and the soul, and to unite individual consciousness with that of universal consciousness, or all of us together. And yoga originated in ancient India, as Vanessa mentioned, and was brought to the Western world by one of the leaders of yoga, of many, Patanjali, who created the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, including 8 limbs of yoga, which are taught to yoga instructors. And I'll go into those now. So, as I mentioned, yoga is much more than just asanas. Yoga has 8 limbs, and I've separated them here by color based off of different groups of practice. So there are yamas and niyamas, which are values and really disciplines. So yamas are restraints, moral disciplines, and moral vows. And niyamas are positive duties or observances, rules to follow for oneself to be in yoga. Asanas are the postures. Pranayama refers to breathing techniques. And then we have pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, which are all meditation techniques. So pratyahara is sense withdrawal. Dharana is focused concentration. And if we focus our concentration long enough, we may reach a state of dhyana, which is meditative absorption. And if we maintain that long enough, we may reach samadhi, which is bliss or ultimate enlightenment. So for the sake of neuroscience and research, I've split these 8 limbs into 3 branches of yoga that may show or elicit different changes in the body and brain. So we have postures, we have our different meditations, and breathing. And the idea here is that postures may impact the brain and body in a different way than meditations would, and in a different way than breath work would. So most research done on yoga focuses on the effects of asanas or stretching exercises. And we often think of yoga as asanas, but it's important to note that yoga can also be meditation alone or pranayama alone, and various forms of yoga can include different amounts of these elements. For example, a yoga nidra practice would have few postures, but more meditation and more breathing. And we would expect this to affect the brain and body in a different way than a vinyasa or hatha class that's focused more on the postures. So these different branches of yoga or elements of yoga can really elicit different responses. And I'll briefly go through what kind of changes we may expect from each of these branches. And then I'll go into what research on yoga interventions, including all of these branches, has found. So first, we have asanas, or poses. And depending on the asanas and the sequence, this part of yoga can be similar to a light exercise. So you can get the heart rate up, but still be able to speak comfortably. Exercises and stretching have shown various impacts on the number and connectivity of neurons or cells in the brain. And this is typically in a dose-response manner. So the more exercise we do at the higher intensity, to a certain extent, shows more of these changes. And exercise and stretching have also shown effects on inflammation in the body, but for the sake of time today, I won't be going into that. Then we have meditations. Meditation has been shown to increase the connections between different neurons in the brain and the connection between different regions, and to regulate emotions. Pranayama, or breath work, has shown to impact the body's stress system with slow expirations, increasing our parasympathetic activity, also known as our rest and digest system, and reducing the release of hormones that are associated with stress. Uninostril breathing or alternate nostril breathing, where you block one nostril at a time, has been shown to decrease anxiety, and this has been shown in patients recovering from stroke. Pranayamas have also been shown to impact connectivity in the brain. So before I go through all the literature with you, I just went through different components of yoga and how those can impact the brain. But I will now go through research examining yoga interventions as a whole and what those have found. And it's really important to note here that research is mixed. While some research examining stress and psychological variables are more consistent, studies looking at the mechanisms still do show mixed results. And this may be, again, because different types of yoga will have different amounts of asana, meditation, pranayama. So it's really difficult to keep that consistent across studies, and more research is really needed for mechanistic research. So yoga has been shown to affect stress and mood, with several studies finding improvements in depression and anxiety with yoga and meditative techniques. A reduced number of major depressive episodes and a lower risk for a milder but longer lasting form of depression called dysthymia have been found. Some research points to yoga and meditative techniques being effective antidepressants to treat depressive and anxious disorders as kind of an adjunct therapy to whatever individuals are already using. Yoga has also been shown to impact what's called executive functioning. So executive functions are higher order thought processes that are required when you have to concentrate and think, because acting on your impulses wouldn't be ideal or appropriate in certain situations. Main executive functions include working memory or short-term memory, impulse control, which includes focusing and attention, and cognitive flexibility, so creativity, thinking outside the box and connecting different boxes together. These are all considered executive functioning, and they mostly occur, and one of the main regions of the brain responsible for executive functioning is the prefrontal cortex, which I'll talk more about later. And all of these functions can be impacted negatively by stress. So what do studies on yoga show for executive functioning? Well, we have pranayama studies or breathing studies that have found better spatial and verbal memory in children after only 10 days of training. Reaction time has also been shown to improve in groups that have been doing fast and slow pranayama breath work for 35 minutes, 3 times a week for 12 weeks. In healthy older adults, 6 weeks of hatha yoga, which is more focused on the posture than pranayama, showed improved working memory and attention switching ability. So being able to switch your attention between different tasks or different items. And yoga has been found to be as effective as a physical exercise intervention when it comes to improving executive function, attention, and working memory in teenagers. So we know that stress, mood, and executive functioning can improve with yoga. But really, what's going on in the brain to elicit these changes? Is the brain changing? And what's the root cause of these changes? And as I mentioned before, mechanisms are still being studied, but I'll briefly go through some exciting changes that yoga and its components may elicit in the brain. We'll start with some theories on stress. Many of you have heard before of the fight or flight response, or the autonomic nervous system. This consists of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. So the parasympathetic system is often referred to as rest and digest, and the sympathetic system is activated through a hormonal cascade upon stress to prepare the body for a fight or flight response. So when there are no stressors, the body may be in a parasympathetic mode, and when there are stressors, it may be in a sympathetic mode. And the body evolved this way because As you can imagine, our ancestors may have had to run away from predators like a lion. So the sympathetic system would be activated to allow our pupils to dilate, our heart to increase its beating, our airways to dilate to allow more airflow, our sweat to be produced, stopping digestion as well, because we don't want to digest when we have to run away or fight, etc. So it really affects many different parts of the body to prepare us for a threat. The problem is, with modern society, we're no longer running away from tigers. Now we have more stressors in our lives, and I'm sure everyone here has at least one or two stressors in their lives that they can raise their hand and say they have. And those stressors, although they may not be life-threatening, can still be activating the sympathetic nervous system. So this parasympathetic sympathetic balance can be thrown off. Now, what can yoga do? Well, slow exhalations from breathing in yoga has been shown to enhance the regulation of these systems. Meditation has also been shown to improve the regulation of this system by putting us in a parasympathetic mode sometimes. And in fact, in our Tuesday night brain wellness program mindfulness class, which I noticed some of you are on here, hello, many of us have experienced moments of yawning and fatigue and even eye tearing. So this might be due to the activation of the parasympathetic rest and digest system when we're in that safe meditative mode. Exercise or stretching has also been shown to balance the system and the regulation of the system by activating the sympathetic system during a session. So that's a little bit about how stress can be modified through yoga, but what about connectivity? So connectivity refers to the connection between different cells in the brain, and we can also refer to this as white matter. And one really exciting mode or network of connections that I love to talk about is the default mode network. So the default mode network is, and the best way I could describe this is, imagine you're on a train or you're a passenger in a car and you're looking out the window and your mind is just wandering. That wandering mind is an example of default mode network activity. So it's a network of interacting brain regions that are active when we're in a resting state. And this concept was developed when researchers noticed surprising levels of brain activity in participants who were supposed to be at rest. And they realized the brain is actually quite active at rest, and this network of connections is occurring. So the default mode network is a group of brain regions that show lower levels of activity when we're engaged in a task like paying attention, but higher levels of activity when we're not involved in specific mental exercises and we're in a mind-wandering state. That being said, for yoga, one study found that yoga practice increased the correlation between what's called the medial prefrontal cortex and the right angular gyrus. Now, you don't need to remember names, but I've circled roughly where these regions are, and you can tell they're at different parts of the brain. So the connections between these two regions are increasing during yoga in this study. And because the right angular gyrus is involved in spatio-visual attention towards features in our environment, and the prefrontal cortex, as I mentioned, is responsible for executive functioning and attention. Increased connection between these two areas indicates our ability to pay more attention or be more aware of various elements that are in our environment. So after this yoga intervention, the connections between these regions enhanced and increased, showing that maybe they were able to pay more attention or be more aware of their environment after yoga. This connectivity in the default mode network may decrease with age, but attentional practices like meditation and yoga have been shown in many studies to actually preserve these connections. Other studies have found increased connectivity between many regions in this network, and I'm not going to go into every single one, but the increased connectivity in the other regions have been associated with improved memory performance. So sticking with connectivity and moving away from the default mode network, we also have connections between what's called the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. I've already talked about the prefrontal cortex quite a bit and its role in executive functioning, but the amygdala is a part of our brain that reacts to stress and emotional arousal. And the prefrontal cortex forms connections with neurons that inhibit the amygdala from firing. And this can reduce our feelings of reported or subjective stress. Evidence supports that there are increased connections between the prefrontal cortex and these neurons that inhibit the amygdala with yoga, mindful movements like Tai Chi, and with meditation. So it's actually able to impact our stress in that way by enhancing these connections. So I just spoke about connections between different neurons in different regions and how that can change with yoga and exercise and breathing. But what about the neurons themselves? Gray matter refers to the neuronal cell bodies themselves. And we often talk about gray matter volume, which has been shown to change in meditators, long-term meditators. So in long-term meditators, we've seen changes in the prefrontal cortex gray matter volume, which is responsible for executive functioning, sensory cortices, and the insula, which are related to body awareness, which, as you can imagine from Vanessa's practice, there was a lot of noticing the ground beneath your feet and noticing where on the chair you were, so body awareness. The hippocampal volume, responsible for memory processes, has also been shown to increase after meditation. The cingulate cortex, involved with our sense of self and emotion regulation, has been shown to change. And a decrease in amygdala volume, which I just mentioned, is related to stress and emotional arousal, has been shown with yoga and meditation. So this has been shown with exercise, with gray matter volume changing in various regions, including the prefrontal cortex. And some of these findings have also been found in studies on yoga, such as the decrease in amygdala volume. So really, we're seeing changes in the connections between neurons in the brain with yoga, and we're seeing an increase in volume of cell bodies as well in specific regions. So these are just some of the ways in which yoga interventions have been shown to impact the brain in healthy individuals. But what about individuals with various neurological disorders? Well, for Parkinson's disease, yoga has been shown to improve many motor symptoms, including motor function, balance, joint kinesthesia, upper and lower bradykinesia, rigidity, etc., and even depression and quality of life. For multiple sclerosis or MS, yoga interventions have been shown to improve fatigue, walking and gait, body awareness, balance. The list really goes on, and even to psychological symptoms such as depression, anxiety, mental status, mood, and confidence, social functioning, etc. And finally, when we look at yoga for individuals recovering from stroke, it's been shown to improve balance, fear of falling, pain, range of motion, walking again, and even the possibility for reconnecting and accepting a different body. So in conclusion, there are 8 limbs of yoga, which for the purpose of research, we can further divide into 3: postures, meditations, and breathing. We know that yoga can improve mood, psychological well-being, and executive functioning. Yoga may improve nervous system regulation, connectivity in the brain, and gray matter, plus a variety of symptoms and neurological conditions. So we do know that yoga can have this positive influence on our life, our mood, our stress. And while the exact mechanisms are still being teased out and different forms of yoga are being studied, which makes it a little bit more difficult, we can still conclude that yoga is a good thing to add to our daily life and daily practice. So the next question is, what can you do? Well, if you're interested in starting yoga, you can go to the bcbrainwellness.ca website, go to current programs, and go to yoga and find out more. If you've not registered for an exercise class with us in the past, you'll need to submit an assessment. This can take 10 to 15 minutes and it can be done online. It's really for us to just assess your level and safety. Once you've been assessed, you can then register for a class at the level that you've been recommended. So we have levels ranging from 1 to chair yoga all the way to level 4. So we really have a wide variety of classes available. If you don't want to take a class, you can watch one of our online yoga videos by going to the BC Brain Wellness website, resources, program videos, and then see our yoga videos. So the next step is to just practice and see how yoga can help you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise on the effects of yoga with us, Amanda. Sorry. I know we are running a little bit behind on time here, but we'll still stick around to answer a couple questions from the audience. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat box and we'll try to get to them. All right, to start us off, it looks like we have one for Amanda. Do you know if there's any research regarding yoga for the treatment of addictions?
That's a really great question. There's a wide variety of addiction research out there, and I'm not 100% sure. What I do know is that the meditative component of yoga can help with enhancing the prefrontal cortex and awareness. And sometimes that can help us with addiction. But yes, addiction is very complicated, and it also depends what it is too as well.
Wonderful. All right. Another question for Vanessa now. Could you elaborate maybe on some of the misconceptions surrounding yoga and what somebody that is first wanting to get involved, the steps that they can take if they're a bit overwhelmed just seeing everything all at once?
I think finding just the right class that's the fit for you. So as Amanda mentioned, the Brain Wellness program has some ranges of classes. So I think that is one way to start. And don't be discouraged if the first class you weren't sure or it didn't quite feel right, or you were a little bit feeling a bit clumsy in the practice. It is, excuse me, a practice that is a slow progression. And it's amazing, even some of the changes I've heard about from participants taking my class, or I can actually sometimes see increases in range of motion and posture. And so it is something where I'd encourage people to sort of give it a few classes before you make a judgment or decision that it's not right for you. And sometimes trying a different teacher can even make a big difference.
Wonderful, thank you. One other question in the chat here for you, Vanessa. Do you have any lasting side effects from your concussion or head injury? And if so, how is yoga making a difference in your recovery?
Really good question. One of the things that I found really challenging about the word recovery, and when I would visit my family doctor, and even for myself, I was often comparing myself to, well, when can I get back to being like this? Or when will I be like that? Or when can I, live without tinnitus and headaches and multitasking challenges? And I think the practice of yoga really helped me start to just accept where I'm at and stop forcing myself to be different than what I was. So that was a really important aspect of my own recovery. And definitely the meditation aspects of yoga have helped me tremendously in terms of better sleep, better focus. So I continue to practice, and then that just general sense of well-being that you can achieve from practicing yoga is really important. So yoga is still making a difference. I still have goals so that I want to progress towards in my own yoga practice. Some of them I've achieved, and I do still suffer from some concussion head injury symptoms. So the tinnitus has never gone away. It is pretty significant. And recently I just started on prescription medication for headaches. I was very resistant to that after 4 years. I finally decided to try it, and that's made a significant impact to headaches. And right now I'm also seeing an osteopath.
All right, thank you. We've gone a couple minutes over time here, so we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. If anybody has any additional questions, you can feel free to shoot us an email. We'll get back to you. But thank you so much to both of our speakers, Amanda and Vanessa, for sharing your expertise with us and your story. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today on Zoom. We'll see you guys all next session, hopefully.